with Mrs. Martha Gragg at her home here at the Genesis Health Center in Mooresville. Today is March 22nd, 2006. And Ms. Gragg, we thank you so much for allowing us to come and interview you. We know that you have been a lifelong resident of Mooresville, and we know you have some good information to give us about life on West Center Street. So we'll begin.
Martha, you were actually born in the house on West Center Street.
Yes, ma'am.
Your father built it?
No, we bought it from Mr. Sam Lawrence. My daddy bought it from him.
He owned a lot of property on West Center Avenue.
Yes, he did.
And can you tell us some of the other houses that are on property that he owned?
I'm not sure of the houses, but I know he owned the house that he was in and the lot next to him, and he owned some property behind him that was a pasture. Now, I don't know about any more of the houses because I don't remember them being built.
What about Mr. John Houston, the Houston house? Did he build that house?
No, I don't think so.
I see.
Let's go back to Mr. Lawrence a minute. Now, we know that the original hospital was on West Center. Was that in Mr. Lawrence's home?
Mr. Lawrence, and I call him Uncle Sam, owned that house, the White House that the old hospital was in, where the doctors had their offices and the nurses spent their time, and he gave it and the property right beside it that they built the brick building in. And then they had some parking space behind it.
Okay. And then, of course, he later gave the property on East Center for the hospital.
He gave the property, and Dr. McClellan and Dr. Taylor and Dr.
Templeton?
Dr.
No,
Templeton?
it was a throat specialist. Doctor lived on across from Hal Johnson.
Bell? Dr. Bell? No.
Oh, no.
Well, the name will come to you, I'm
Anyway,
sure.
he lived on West Center too. At the time, it was a hospital.
And Dr. McClellan eventually lived in that building.
Yes.
It was the first hospital.
After the hospital moved out, he moved in.
And there was a walkway that connected.
And they made apartments in the old hospital and rented them after they got rid of the hospital.
Now, your father worked at the Mooresville flour mill.
Yes.
Do you have any recollections of anything, any stories he told you about the flour mill?
Well, when I was a little girl, the flour mill burned down, and I cried like anybody would when then the ones that worked there went to work, that skipped one day, and then they went back, clearing it out and rebuilding the flour mill. And there were three men that owned it: Mr. Brawley and Mr. My mind.
That's okay.
Yeah, if you think of it, interrupt us and tell us who they
Oh, I know who they were, but Mr. Lentz from our street, and
that was Miss Ruth Lentz's father.
And he lived on our street.
Yes. So farmers brought their wheat in to be ground into flour?
Yeah.
Did they do any other kind of grains? Or
they had just corn too, I think.
So the flour mill burned. The
whole building burned.
And the furniture factory burned also, I believe. Do you remember that?
It wasn't at the same time, I don't think.
But it was a different time.
That was at a different Now, there was another a flour mill before that, and it burned. It was on West Center.
Where on West Center?
It was where Johnson's store has that place that on West Center, the little place that used to be
The automotive place?
uh-huh.
The
And
brick
they had-
building that's still there.
Yeah, that flour mill burned down, and then they built this building there, and that's where Johnson's kept their horses underneath it
Right.
when they had their coal and ice place.
Oh, I see. Then, was it a different family that owned that than the families that owned the flour mill on Main Street?
The ones that owned that one was Templeton and Williams.
Oh.
Dr. Templeton's father and Mr. Williams.
Was Mrs. Templeton a Williams?
Yes,
So it was his father and her father?
yeah.
I see. Real family business. Let's see.
They also, I think, made caskets.
That was my family. They made caskets on the
Yeah,
third
really?
floor.
Well, I knew that somebody made them in that vicinity,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes. You mentioned once to me that you had an aunt and uncle who died in the flu epidemic, who died of the flu.
my grandmother and my aunt died within 45 minutes of each other of the flu.
What years was that? Do you remember what?
I don't remember, but I think I heard it was around 1918. Is that when that was?
Tell me, what was your grandmother, which grandmother died with flu?
That was my grandmother Brawley.
Probably.
Your mother's maiden name was
Steele.
Steele.
Agnes Steele.
Tell us about you. We mentioned the Scottish lumber yard. Can you tell us any buildings that were built by Mr. Donald?
Well, Mr. Donald lived across the street in one of the Turlington houses, and he built him a house on East Center Avenue, which was called Eastern Heights at that time. And after they were in there, he built the apartment house on McClellan Avenue, and that was, of course, the first one like that, I would think, in Mooresville. And he called it Elizabeth Apartments for his daughter, Elizabeth Donald Johnson.
Who married Cy Johnson.
Cy Johnson.
Also, let's see. Did your mother worked at Barium Springs
At Barium Springs.
as a matron?
She was a matron up there for 10 years. She always said 10 years. I don't know exactly how many it was, but that's what she always said.
Explain what it means to be a matron.
She looked after the cottage and the girls that were in it and tried to keep them.
At that time, Barium Springs was an orphanage.
Oh, yes. And hers was the one that had the food in it, and she had to look after the food for the people that were up there.
Did she do the cooking?
Oh, they did it, yeah.
But she was in charge
She
of
was in charge
preparation.
of it.
We learned that there used to be a bicycle club in Mooresville. Were you?
Yes, I was in the bicycle club. There were a lot of us in it. We would pedal. We went to Davidson and back one night, and we would just go out, and go all around. We went down to the Harris's and made that turn down there on that link Collar Creek and Linwood Road, and came back. I can't remember too many, but we would just ride and ride.
Did you have regular meetings, or did you just?
Just got together about once a week and went. riding just for the exercise.
How many of you were, how many members did you have?
And I don't know that we ever had a special number. But
Who
there
was some
was a picture of us one time. I don't know where it is, but
Who were some of the other ladies that were in that club with you?
Laura Colson and Lillian Colson, Catherine,
Your
Brawley.
sister Catherine Brawley.
and I think I'm not sure whether Elizabeth Henderson was in that or not. I'm not sure. And there were just a lot of us. Just whoever wanted to go would come.
This was during the war years.
Yeah, when it wasn't much traffic.
Nobody could
We
buy-
could get on the highway and go and think nothing of it.
What did you call yourselves? Did you have a name?
Tubbs Troop, I believe.
Tubby's Troop.
Tubbs Troop,
Who was Tubby?
Catherine.
Your sister Catherine. Now you were born in the house on West Center,
Yes.
and then you were married, and you've always lived in that house.
Well, when I was married, he was in the service. And by the time he got out 2 years later, it was more than 2 years later, Mother was not very well, and we had one child, and there was no way I could move out. So we just kept on living there.
Now, when you say he was in the service, tell us who he was.
Martha Gragg.
So you lived with Ms. Brawley
Yeah,
on West Center.
we lived in
The house.
and when we were married, Daddy had already passed away.
Now, Hassel worked at the at Mooresville
Marshall
Mill.
Mills. He worked there for 40 years, I think. I'm not sure, but it was a long time.
Let's see.
Hassel must have enjoyed being in the service because he stayed in the National Guard.
He was in with the National Guard and the service for 16 years.
Yeah.
He was one of the first ones in the National Guard. He helped get it organized.
And at that time they met on the what
On
used
West
to
Center
be.
Avenue, where the old telephone building was, where the telephone office was.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations met there, didn't they? In that there was a big house, a white house.
This was the building that the telephone office was in.
Oh, I
Now,
see.
there was a community house there, right beside where the parking lot is. And in that parking lot, the community clubs, Lions Club, had their first meeting there. The Rotary, and what's the one I'm leaving out? Kiwanis Club. And then also, I guess it was the first library. Ms. McNeely, that lived across the street from you all.
Miss Cresswell.
Ms. Cresswell, but it was Ms. McNeely that,
Miss Branch McNeely?
it was Nancy McNeely's mother. Nancy,
Oh, Miss Ed McNeely?
wasn't it? But anyway, they had a room upstairs that was the library, and it was open just a day or two a week.
My goodness.
Bet you didn't know that.
Nope. Didn't know that. Then did the library move to some place on Main Street?
Yeah,
Where was that?
I don't remember.
It was upstairs, I remember, over a store.
I can't remember. I remember it was up there, but I can't remember where.
Now, you went to First Presbyterian Church
Yes,
in Mooresville. You were baptized in that church.
yes. Dr. White.
Dr. White. And you used to work at the church, didn't you?
I did. I was church hostess. More years than anybody knows. No one knows.
When you were church hostess, did the young people have a supper every Sunday night?
Every Sunday night.
So what was your job as church hostess?
Getting someone to look after the meals that night and planning the food and buying it. And if there wasn't somebody else, I had to fix it. Sometimes, I know one time, one of the people that had charge of the young people, she did it one week, I did it one week, and somebody else did it the third week, and then we just rotate around, and every third week we had it.
About how many young people would come, do you remember?
Well, it varied.
But was it a small group or a large group?
Pretty good sized group, it got to be.
They came for those good meals.
I don't know how many.
Breaking bread together.
Breaking bread together.
We did that.
Do you remember other ministers? Who came after Dr. White?
Mr. McLeod. He was associate minister. When he finished his ministry, his schooling, he came, and before he finished it, he came on weekends, and then he worked as a summer substitute. He worked in the summer, helping Dr. White. And then when he finished, well, they got him for associate minister, or I don't know what it was called then, but that's what it is now. And then Dr. White got sick, and he finished out his 20th year, and we got Mr. McLeod to come on. And
Okay, Miss Gragg, where did you go to school?
South School. It was,
How many grades were at South School?
I imagine 6,
And then you went to Mooresville High School?
and then went to Mooresville High.
And how many grades were there? How many grades total did you finish when you
Yeah,
finished?
we were going for 12 years.
Oh, you went for 12 years, okay.
Do you remember any of the teachers at South School when you were there?
Yes, Miss Mort McKnight was my first grade teacher. She was a teacher for a long, long time. In fact, my first year I went to high school, they had it all over there, and they built South School at that time over on East Center Avenue. And I went to the second grade there. Now, I can't tell you who my second grade teacher was. And then Dorothy Howard was one of the teachers. And then...
Who was the principal?
Oh, goodness, I should have tried to think of that.
Well, do you remember any of your high school teachers?
Well, I know some of the others of the down there.
At South School?
At South School, Cora Freeze and was one of them. She started when I was down there in about the 6th grade. And, well, I really don't remember too many names now. I've forgotten them.
You can
It's
see
been a
them.
long time.
It has been.
We need to say for the record that Miss Gragg is 92 years old, is that
Yeah.
correct? So, you know, we're talking about a long time ago when she was in school. And who do you remember any of the high school teachers?
Miss Mary Shove
Miss Mary Show.
and Ms. Johnson,
Florence Johnson?
Florence Johnson, and your mother taught me somewhere.
Well,
She was in the lower grades, wasn't she?
Yes, but when she taught math in high school for like 1 year or 2 years, and she didn't like high school much.
Now tell everybody who your mother is, because
My mother was Eunice Jordan, and she married Dick Johnston. She came to Mooresville with a whole group of teachers who arrived at the same time. Florence Brawley Johnston and Florence Query Brawley, who married.
There were 6 of them that got married the same year. They all came and stayed at Mrs. Cornelius's. And the men in Mooresville, there was quite a few. Hal and Dick and
There were Vernon Boyles.
And Brawley, Presley Brawley.
Presley Brawley's father. Yeah.
And, he was, and I knew all of those.
Well, it must have been fun for you students to watch all of this courting that went on.
Well, we didn't see the courting, but they were. But it was interesting that 6 of them would come to Mooresville and live in the same house, and all of them get married.
where was Miss Cornelius' teacherage, or the place where she boarded teachers?
Where
was it?
It was where Cavan's funeral home was second. The second one of Cavan's funeral homes on Main Street.
Was it across from, a little farther up, it was across from Bonte and Sam Neal's house, and
it was about, the bank is about where
it was.
was. I mean, it's
Almost.
the second house.
Yes,
the bank's on the
second
corner.
It's probably where the parking lot is now.
Where was the first cabins?
The first cabin was on Broad and the second one from ours over that way.
On Broad Street?
Not Broad.
Not
It was one that at the corner of the school was.
Moore?
Moore Avenue.
Moore Avenue.
It was Brown House, but that was the first one, and then they moved up there to where Ms. Milker was, and then they built Cavan's funeral home.
Now, where was Mrs. Melker? We mentioned Mrs. Melker, but we talked about Ms. Cornelius. Now, were their houses near each other?
Ms. Cornelius lived on Broad Street, and
No, I think Ms. Cornelius was on Main Street.
Hmm?
I think Ms. Cornelius was on Main Street. That's where the teachers boarded.
Where Cavan's?
Where Cavan's is. Was.
Was.
Yeah, this is the second one.
well, she moved down to.
So, do you have any special memories of friends of yours who were in high school at the same time you were?
Well, not too much. I don't think any of them made any outstanding. I know they did, but I don't know them. But Elizabeth Donald Johnson was in there with me part of the time, and
Well, what about Isabel Brawley Cashin?
she was older than me.
Oh, I see. And Margaret Mayhew
And
was younger.
She's about the same
About
age.
the same age.
But anyway,
And what about the McNeely family there on Academy Street? Asa and Thurston and Jane and Lucy?
well, they there was something funny that happened. Wasn't funny, along with the hospital, I thought. One Christmas, there were 3 boys had appendicitis and were operated on at the Mooresville Hospital. At the Lawrence Hospital. One of them was either one of the McNeely, Asa, or one of them. One of them was my brother Jimmy, and the other one was one of the Hudson boys. But I just thought that was an interesting thing. It was,
And they were operated on in the old hospital?
the old hospital, and all of them at Christmas time. Such an odd time to have to.
Yeah, you mentioned your brother Jimmy. He was the one that worked at Blackwelder's for a long
He
time.
worked at Blackwelder's.
Blackwelder's Furniture.
And that was on
He
South-
worked at
South
Culver's
Main
Furniture
Street.
first, and then went to Blackwelder's. Culver's was the corner one across from Johnson's, and he started working there when he got out of college, and he stayed in the furniture business all the time.
When did
Go ahead.
When did Jimmy leave Mooresville? Didn't he move to? Oh, he always
No,
stayed.
he always
You have a
lived, he
sister.
lived out in the country
Oh, okay. But your sister moved to Atlanta,
at Marietta.
Marietta, Georgia. Anyway.
Yeah.
Do you remember any stories about the Mr. Turlington, who was such was everybody's lawyer in Mooresville?
He was everybody's lawyer, and he was very much for prohibition. He was the one that started that, and it was called the Turlington Act.
Oh.
You remember that?
Nope. But now what
But then
about?
it was, repealed.
Yes. Well, what about Mr. D.E. Turner? He was in the legislature about the time it was repealed, wasn't he?
I'm not sure just exactly when, but I know he was in there.
And I think he was responsible for being able to sell light beer. That was the first step toward repealing prohibition.
But that's two more from West Center Avenue.
Oh, it's a
quite a notorious little short street.
Yeah.
Your daddy too.
Yeah, my daddy too. What about, you mentioned, we mentioned that Mr. Turlington was famous for having been very much for prohibition. Can you remember any other things about him?
Well, he was a good lawyer, and he was lawyer for Barium Springs. He did that for nothing, and for the church and things like that. He was a real good religious person, and he belonged to the First Presbyterian. And he had two daughters, Sarah and Mary Howard. I know there's plenty of things that he did that would be, I believe he started out the scouting. I'm not sure, but I think he was high up in scouting
Something to do with it.
when they first started it. I hadn't thought about it, but
And he lived right across the street from you.
Yeah.
So you grew up knowing him, watching him go to work every morning with his hat and his cane. He used to walk every morning, right?
yeah, he was a good walker. He didn't ride to work, and he had an office upstairs. And he said one time that one of the young fellows said he had an office upstairs, but he was going to have to get one on the first floor. Mr. Turlington just laughed, because he'd been on the second floor and was much older.
At that time, there were a lot of offices upstairs over the stores. The Mr. Turlington.
His was over the picture show. Yes. Carolina. Carolina.
I think the State was farther up Main Street.
Yeah.
And the Carolina was there.
Right in the center.
Right in the center. Was it next to the bank? The Carolina Theater? Wasn't there a bank along there?
The bank was, Turner's store was between them.
Oh, I see.
But there were dentist offices over some of the stores downtown too, weren't there?
Yes, it was, Dr. Francis was over Miller Drug after they got Miller Drug up on Main Street. I think it was first I'm not sure, I was thinking it was first down on Broad Street years ago when the fire truck and fire station and everything were down there.
When Dr. Benninger started in the 1940s, I guess, late 40s, early 50s, he was in one of those upstairs buildings.
Yeah, he was,
Beside, at that time, Goodman Drug Store. He
yeah,
was upstairs
up over
beside it.
that Fink's Jewelry Store.
Yeah, right.
There's a stairs in between that, and then there was a beauty parlor or two up there. And then the telephone office was over Johnson's.
On Broad Street.
On Broad Street, yes.
Yeah,
On
on Broad
Broad.
Street.
Martha, tell us, what can you remember about some of the stores in Mooresville when you were growing up?
Well, there were a lot of, I worked at the 10-cent store. That's where I started out when I was 16. $1.50 a day from 8 to 8.
12 hours?
Yeah. And then we worked, that was on Saturdays. For a week, we got $9. That was when we were in high school.
Well, that's
And,
pretty good.
Now,
I mean, $9 a week.
where was that located? Where was that dime store?
It was where Bob Hammond's
Bob
place.
It was Rose's?
Roses.
Was it
Roses
Rose's?
5 and 10. Yeah.
Delks came later, is that right?
Mr. Delk worked at the Roses for a long time, and he came and started out in one of the apartments over on the old hospital.
Oh, really?
He had the front apartment, and then he kept on working, and after he got a lot of knowledge about it, he started his own 10-cent store, is what we called them back then. But
What other stores do you remember growing up, as you were growing up?
well, I remember the Piggly Wiggly, and I bet that doesn't many people know about that, but that was a little grocery store, and it was the second house from the corner next to Moore Avenue on Main Street. The bank was there on the corner, and then it was one on the next, and you had to go through a turn thing to get in and out.
A Piggly Wiggly in
Piggly
Mooresville?
Wiggly. Yeah, it's been a long time.
That's the first I've heard that.
Yeah. Did it have all kinds of groceries?
Yeah.
Did it have meat?
I imagine, but I don't know for sure. I don't know.
You don't remember how long it was there, when?
No, I'm not sure.
Was this location? Was it beside the post office? I'm not sure where you're talking
It's
about.
on Moore Avenue.
Moore Avenue.
Federal, the bank there on the corner at Moore and Main
There's a-
Street.
There's a bakery there
Where the
now.
bakery is
Where the
now.
bakery is
Okay.
now. Okay.
What was the name of that bank?
Merchants and Farmers, or Farmers and Merchants was what it was originally, I believe.
Okay.
Then
I'm
it
not
became Piedmont. Then it became Piedmont Banks. What I remember, Piedmont Bank.
Merchants and Farmers, was that it?
I think that's what Mr. Hart told us.
Well, he would know, I think. And First National Bank was across the street,
It was on down close to Turner's.
closer to Turner's, yeah. Near where
Yeah.
the movie theater was.
The First National was the one that had the steps up to it, and it still has those steps there. I don't know what's in it now because it recently has changed hands, owners, and it's by Turner's Hardware. And of course, Turner's always had that hardware with everything in it. They even sold crystal and china and all that. That's where we went for our wedding presents to give anybody, was to Turner's Hardware.
And let's see, what other kinds of stores? There was Belk's.
Well, then Max had their two stores, you know, one for women and one for men. Madeline running the women's and Mitchell running the other one. Of course, Mr. Mack was in there too. And then the drugstore Mr. Goodman had on the corner, that was an old one. Somebody was talking about telephone numbers. Well, his number was number 1, so you know he was there for a long time.
Does that mean he was the first one to get a telephone, probably?
I don't know, but that was where his was the,
Well, the W.N. Johnston, my family's store on Broad Street was number 4.
yeah.
And you never, somehow if it was more than one digit, you always said all the digits.
Yeah.
But if there was just one digit, you always said number 4 or number 1.
Yeah.
Did you all do it that way?
And the flour mill was 16, and I knew a lot of them at one time. It seemed like it was, Turlington's was 7.
Their house. Their house was 7. Their residence number.
I don't know whether it was the residence or not, whether it was his office. But ours was 202. It was hard to remember.
Well, Martha, you always had a big garden, and you always did a lot of cooking and canning.
Oh, goodness. I did. At one time, Mr. George C. Goodman owned 3 lots, and that was where the Altons lived, and on down through to the apartment, and we had that for a garden.
Oh my.
And the neighbors liked that.
Now, that's because you gave the things to the neighbors. They didn't have to work. Can you think of any other memories that you want to share with us, Martha?
Well, there's a lot of them there, but I don't know. There was, I don't know whether you all, I know you all don't remember the Gershkoffs.
No.
They lived in the house that's there by the Turner apartment.
Oh,
Upright.
the uprights.
They lived there, and they had a store up on Main Street. And poor things, they were foreigners, and they came and they didn't get much business, and they finally just went out of business. They had 2 daughters that were very popular. The girl, everybody around liked them. But
How old were the daughters? Can you?
they were in high school.
And there were the Goldsteins.
Yeah,
They lived on West Center, in the old apartments, I think.
yeah. And then there were the ones that run that 10-cent store, the Prince store. They lived in the Abernathy house. Let's see. They had a 10-cent store up there by Turner. Turner's Hardware up that way, somewhere in there.
I got a question for you. You mentioned that your mother was a Steele, and that was a large family. And I know a couple of those Steeles went out west to Colorado in that area to live.
My two uncles went out west.
Right. Now, weren't there some people from Mooresville that went out there and visited them?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about the trip, or who might have gone, or about when that was.
Well, Mother was one of them, and didn't Aunt Nanny go?
I think so.
And there were 3 or 4 of them went out west. And they got on this train, and now that was really something, and went all the way to Colorado, Grand Junction, Colorado.
Now, when would this be? Would this have been? What do you know about what year that was?
No, I don't. It's been a long time though. I was up in age. I mean, you know, because I'd look after things when Mother go off like that.
So this was after you were married and living at home?
Mm-mm.
No, it was before you were married.
Before I was married, a long time before.
Okay, they would have gone to, didn't they go to Statesville to catch the train? Do you
I
know?
would think so.
That would have been a long trip back then.
That was a long trip. And Mother got a motion sickness, and she of course got sick along the way on the train. But they had a wonderful time, and they talked about it a lot after they got back. Uncle Gray lived in Grand Junction, and Uncle Cowan lived in Denver. I think that's right. They were both engineers, and Uncle Cowan, a snowslide went across the track, and his train was wrecked, and he was scalded to death. Bad thing, but
Well, that happened in 1903, so I know you're talking about a long time ago.
yep.
He was killed in 1903.
I didn't realize it was that long ago, but I knew it was a long time.
Now, your father, was he an only child, or was
No, there were several of them, but his mother and one of his sisters died with typhoid fever in 1918, and then Uncle Morris lived here most of his life, and he went to California for 10 years. I remember when he came back so well. He came to our house, and I looked at him, and none of us knew him because we hadn't seen him, and then I realized who he was. I called Daddy to come and see. But it was quite a reunion after 10 years. That was a Sunday night ritual. He wrote him a letter every Sunday night. And then,
So who were some of your father's other brothers and sisters?
well, there's Gudger, Aunt Ada Gudger. Minford Gudger was her husband, and they lived on Magnolia, the last place they lived. They built a house on Magnolia across from the school building. And that's all. I mean, we just didn't have any family. With all the Brawlers in Mooresville, we didn't have many.
different family, a different
Well,
line?
they said there were 3 families of Brawlers that came to Mooresville. And it must have been a long time ago, because we can't trace up kin people or anybody close around here.
From your family.
Not like we can with the Steels.
Anybody have any other questions? Anything else you feel like you want to tell us about?
You mentioned the Steels. I just look at one thing here. Your mother was one of 11 children. Is that right? A big
Yeah.
family of Steels.
8 girls and 3 boys. And they all lived within, what would you say, 5 miles of each other?
Probably until a couple of them moved out west, and I guess.
Oh, I meant of the girls.
Oh, yeah,
All the
the girls.
girls lived within 5
Yes.
miles of each other all their life.
Yeah.
And at times, I know at one time there were 4 of them in one circle at church. That's something to say, isn't it?
That is.
Well, we thank you, Ms. Gragg, for your interview. You've told us a lot of stories, and we've learned some things we didn't know about downtown Mooresville,
Well-
and we really appreciate that.
There's one thing I'm going to have it on.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
There's a picture of Uncle Sam and Aunt Debbie Lawrence over in the medical center that one of the doctors found and brought. And that picture used to hang in the Lawrence Hospital, in the second hospital. I think it should be gotten out and put in the
museum.
things with you know.
With the museum
With the
thing.
museum.
Yeah.
So it is now at Lake Norman Regional
Yes,
Medical
it's on
Center.
the second floor.
Okay.
I've seen it many a time.
And
I always
it's the
stop
new
and look at it.
hospital? The new hospital, the Lake Norman?
Yeah, it's in that medical building behind it.
Oh, it's not in the hospital?
No, it's not in the hospital, it's in the medical building.
Okay.
Okay.
Right behind it's on the second floor.
On the second floor. Do you know what doctor it's near?
I was going to see about my hearing aids, and they've taken that away from now, so I don't know exactly who's in there. I mean, it was at one of the offices in that place, and that's how I got started seeing it going there.
Okay.
That's very good knowledge to
Yes,
have.
thank you.
But it's such a good picture of them, and it doesn't need to get
Lost.
lost.
Yes.
There were a lot of pictures over there of the doctors that originally started the Lawrence Hospital. And I guess I'm a little prejudiced.
Well, that's the historical hospital of Mooresville,
Yeah.
and I can understand why you feel that way. Okay.
Have you seen the pictures of the doctors at other places?
Do you have any idea what happened to the
I don't know where any of them are,
Mm-hmm.
but they had them in the old First Lawrence Hospital. They had a whole lot of them in there, in the library or somewhere. But anyway, that picture I always thought ought to be saved, since they actually started the hospital in Mooresville.
Well, we appreciate that, and we'll follow up with it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else? Well, thank you
Not
so
right
much.
now.
Thank you. Ms. Gragg, we're going to continue with your interview, and I want you to tell us about the fire at the 10-cent store.
Well, we went up to when the alarm went off, and it was up at the 10-cent store, and it was very dangerous because it was getting in the walls, and they said if it got in the walls, it was going to, they said in Charlotte on the news that it would get the whole block, because Blackwelder's Furniture and the 10-cent store, and I don't know whether Rankin's store had there, but all across there. And I've forgotten what started the fire, but it was a bad one, and they couldn't get it out because of the way where it was.
How much of that block was damaged by the fire?
I'm not sure, several buildings though were damaged. But they did get it out before it did real bad damage like they thought at first it was going to.
Was this at nighttime?
Yes, at 12 o'clock at night. And it was pretty cool weather too.
So I guess all the town was out there to watch.
Well, there were a lot of us that went. But I just happened to get parked across the street from it, and so we just sit there and watched. And
Who did you go to the fire with? Who took you up to the fire?
Rachel and John Allred. They wanted to go to the fire and see what it was all about, which we did every now and then.
So there were people from North Main Street who came down to the fire?
Mary Agnes and Harding Rogers, and I don't know who all. It's been a long time.
But these people who came to the fire just jumped out of bed and put on house coats and came, right?
Yeah, and they came.
Well, that's a wonderful story. That's the first time we've heard that story, so we appreciate you telling us that.
Well, it was interesting at the time.
It's interesting now.
Thank you again.